caring for their families. And if it means folks like me going to jail, then so be it. If it means our union being fined, then so be it. We're looking for a solution here. Our members want a solution here, but that solution has to be found at a bargaining table. There's no...
Hell yeah. And just so we're clear, by the way, this is not just coming from me or, far leftists or something like that. This is your generic, local news outlet, 604 Now. That's the area code. The headline says, Air Canada flight attendants have reportedly been living in RVs due to low pay, serving coffee for less than minimum wage at 30,000 feet. Air Canada flight attendants rallied outside of major airports demanding fair pay and an end to unpaid work. Union reps say junior crew members are earning less than minimum wage, with some forced to rely on food banks or live in RVs just to get by. Quick background. This is the thing I was just about to say, actually. I didn't know this, but you don't get paid as someone who works for an airline until the door closes. That means, like, your commute, fine. Most companies don't pay for commutes anyways because they're greedy-ass capitalists who don't give a fuck. But you commute all the way to the airport, you get there, and then you have to do a lot of shit, right? You got to go through security, you got to get your bag checked, you got to go through all that. You're still not on the clock. So you could get detained through security, you could spend an extra long time having to go through all of that. You then have to wait in the waiting room before the flight is ready to be boarded, all that kind of stuff, and then you board the plane. And then at the moment you board the plane, you're still waiting to get on that good old clock, and then the door closes, and then boom, you start to get your salary. This has resulted in a lot of junior workers having to do things they didn't imagine they would be doing working for an airline. Many of them are living in RVs, communal homes. Many of them are asking for donations from food banks. Some are even reportedly eating leftover meals as a result of the fact that they cannot afford groceries for a strike. I think it was 97% of the union voted for the strike. They basically didn't have any of their demands met by the corporation, and then the corporation wanted to wait this out, and then the strike is triggered, and the strike begins, and then the corporation goes to big government at that point, being like, save us, ooh, we're too big to fail, we need government, we love government. This is also a company that has taken, by the way, hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies, especially during the COVID pandemic. This is a company where the workers have taken massive pay cuts in the past to try and save it. I'll talk about that as well. And this is also a company in which the CEOs of the corporation are making huge amounts of money. We're talking the top CEO, I think, took in $12 million last year. The board and the next couple of ones, it was like $7 million, $4 million, $3 million. They're making approximately 438 times the amount of money that their employees are making right now, which is also vile and disgusting. Just horrifying practices all around.
And the chants of this crowd, hell no, we won't go.
If you have not been following this labor dispute between Air Canada and flight attendants, I don't think you truly understand how interesting and layered this story is. So I'm going to break it all down, as right now labor unions are banding together to fight for Air Canada flight attendants, as they've announced a plan to defy a back-to-work order that is based on a very shaky...
That's one of the coolest things about this. So this is rare, in that the government stepped in. The government was like, you know what, fuck it. Y'all, you got to get mandatory binding arbitration. You most likely will not result in, really good terms for the workers. But at the end of the day, the flight's got to fly. People are getting stranded. This is egregious, so we're not even going to let you strike for 48 hours. Well, the strikers, the union, are defying those orders. And that's kind of going to be like, well, what happens next, right? Does that mean that they go to jail? And potentially, I'm not kidding. The national president of the CUPE just said that he's willing to go to jail over this.
There's no limit. We're going to stay strong. We're going to stay committed to making sure that those workers can do the job that they love doing and actually be able to afford a roof over their heads, to afford caring for their families. And if it means folks like me going to jail, then so be it. If it means our union being fined, then so be it. We're looking for a solution here. Our members want a solution here, but that solution has to be found at a bargaining table. There's no...
Hell yeah. And just so we're clear, by the way, this is not just coming from me or, far leftists or something like that. This is your generic, local news outlet, 604 Now. That's the area code. The headline says, Air Canada flight attendants have reportedly been living in RVs due to low pay, serving coffee for less than minimum wage at 30,000 feet. Air Canada flight attendants rallied outside of major airports demanding fair pay and an end to unpaid work. Union reps say junior crew members are earning less than minimum wage, with some forced to rely on food banks or live in RVs just to get by. They're calling on the airline to make the wages soar as high as the planes that they work on, which is ridiculous, absurd, and just completely unacceptable, to be completely honest with you. Aren't there some jobs in which, like, you get a little bit more afraid if you think that the staff are basically overworked, underslept, and treated like garbage? Do you want your nurses to be passing out as they put needles into your veins? I say no. I would like them to be well rested. I would like them to be well paid, and I would like them to have happy, healthy lives. I mean, this applies to everyone universally, but I'm just trying to really get the liberals here on board, because right now the biggest people in opposition to this outside of the libs and the conservatives happen to be their followers, which is also sad.
Legal basis, which I'll get to later. Now, the details here are just wild, from the clear conflict of interest that will blow your mind to the insane level of unpaid work that flight attendants experience, to the consensus between liberal and conservative voters on this issue, which I found to be a little surprising. There's just so much here. So let me get right into it with the announcement from a few days ago, from August 13th. Air Canada flight attendants forced to issue strike notice to end unpaid work. Now, as somebody who, I'm not a flight attendant, obviously.
I made about $35,000 last year in 2024, and so do most of their flight attendants full-time. I've been working for 2.5 years of service at that time. With rent in Vancouver being one of the most expensive places in the country, $2,500 a month for a bedroom, that's $30,000 a year, it is poverty wages, with an average about 35 hours every month unpaid. So if you're making $35,000 a year, and you're doing a job in which, that requires you to fly constantly, and you're spending $30,000 of that job just on rent, if you don't pay taxes, which is illegal, but that's leaving you with $5,000 for food, your cell phone, the transportation that you take to get there, unless you're somehow finding a way to get there for free. And so good luck saving for your future, kind of shit. The other thing that I should keep in mind, or everyone should keep in mind, is on the other end, here's the executive salaries. The CEO, M. Rousseau, last year, $12.38 million. The CFO, $3.1 million. The COO, $2.93 million. The CCO, $2.74 million. The executive VP, $2.0 million. The full-time entry-level AC flight attendant earns less than minimum wage, about $27,000 a year before tax. The CEO makes 458, sorry, I had the numbers wrong. It's 458 times more than the entry-level flight attendant, which is fucked. Absolutely fucked. And I've heard some people say, well, I mean, they work harder. I mean, those are important jobs. They need to be paid more. They have to organize a lot of people. You don't understand. This is just how upper management works. And it seems right now like upper management isn't doing a very good job, negotiating a fair wage for their own employees. I gotta say, what is really, really refreshing about this story, unlike a lot of other labor disputes, especially ones in which the government and the liberals step in, is that it seems like public sentiment is pretty outraged at the corporation right now. Pretty outraged at a private company. I mean, they have a right to be. I would say not just the horror stories of people having to rely on food banks and shit like that, but also the idea that somehow these are greedy people who are unwilling to make sacrifices. You should know this story as well. When the media right now is rolling out anti-union sentiment, and boy are they ever. One of the reasons why I think that the media was waiting to really start pushing these kind of stories was that it's just so easy to start talking about how your flights are delayed. Isn't that fucked up? Can you imagine being stranded somewhere where you can't get home? Could you imagine how terrifying day I say that might be? They're even talking about how, like, here's a personal story about a family that was about to visit their sick and dying mother, but are now unable to do so because of the strikers. And it's like, because of the strikers, because of the company The company that is refusing to pay their workers. That's grotesque. I know the media is going to try to do their best, but it's just like, it's such a blatant example of how these, again, it's corporate media, it's mainstream media, that they are beholden to, again, their advertisers and then their shareholders kind of shit. But like, you're just regurgitating the same talking points to get everyone really upset about the fact that that is sad. I agree. I've had the privilege to fly. I've been at airports for very long times. I've had flights canceled, flights delayed, all that kind of stuff. It's terrible. No one's here to be on the other side of that, which is why I think you should really pay your fucking workers more. That would be where I would put this if you're worried about that. And Air Canada is doing a thing where it is cheaper to their bottom line for them to give you a refund for your canceled flight. So make sure if you do have a flight with Air Canada right now and something is happening and your flight is canceled, you can pressure them into finding an alternative flight. That may cost the company more, but that's what they're supposed to do. They're not advertising that. A lot of people are just accepting, oh, okay, you'll refund my flight. Shit, how do I get home now? I guess I got to find and book a new flight, maybe with a new airline and stuff. You could be telling them that when you are on the phone with them trying to, again, they'll probably be like, unfortunately, because of the strike, we have to give you a refund. You can be like, well, I need to get home, so I would like you to actually reroute my flight. Find out what where the airline you got to take, and then let's do that. But this is also important in terms of worker solidarity. This is worker solidarity with the company in the past. In 2003 and 2004, during Air Canada's bankruptcy crisis, our flight attendants answered the call to save our national carrier. Every one of us took a $10,000 annual pay cut and lost 1 full week of vacation. At that time, management gave solemn promises that, once the company's finances recovered, these sacrifices would be reversed. Yet here we are, more than 20 years later, and not a single day of vacation has been restored. The highest wage in our classification has increased by only $3 an hour in 2 decades, while the cost of living in Canada has risen by approximately 166% over the same period. Our sacrifices have been permanent. The company's promises were only temporary. As the media will start to roll out anti-union sentiment, saying how reasonable the Air Canada offer is and how greedy the union is, here's a reminder of the sacrifices that they've already made 20 years, and on these 10-year contracts, this may be their only chance, which is also very, very fair.
Honestly, I don't know any flight attendants. I did referral. Note how quick.
I do. One of my best friends, his mother has worked for Air Canada nearly as long as I've known her, and she is reiterating all of these stories and validating them as being true in terms of the worker stories. She knows junior flight attendants who have had to eat leftovers on the planes because they can't afford groceries. She has heard stories of people who do live in RVs and stuff like that. People who have reached out to food banks because, again, they're making below minimum wage once you factor in everything else, because they do not get paid close to 35 hours a month, every single month, as a result of the fact that you got to get to the airport, you got to go through security, you got to wait for the plane, you got to get onto the plane once everyone's boarding, and then the doors close. That's when you get on the clock. That's how this company works.
Quickly, the government imposes arbitration when the employer, Air Canada, wants it. No such order yet in Canada Post, where the employer is resisting arbitration and union has asked for arbitration. So, and that's a couple months ago. This tells you everything about who the government works for. And this is true under conservative governments. This is true under liberal governments. They work on behalf of employers. So when Canada Post is refusing arbitration, even though the union wants it, no arbitration. But Air Canada in this case wants it. They get it just a few days after requesting it.
Less than 48 hours.
It just shows you the massive disconnect between the government.
Also, it shows you how much these corporations will be double-sided. Like, if you ever get government regulation, right, in the sense that, hey, by the way, your company is poisoning the water. Hey, by the way, your company is poisoning the air quality. We need to regulate your industry. Well, that's government tyranny. That's when you'll get all the lobbyists and all the media all of a sudden pushing stories where it's like, overreach, government trying to destroy small businesses, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But as soon as they need help, it's the exact opposite. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, ooh, daddy government, I need you so badly. Please help me. Ooh, I'm too big to fail. I'm a small being, a small multi-million dollar company. Please help me.
And the vast majority of people being the working class. Now, Air Canada flight attendants to defy back to work order remain on strike. So this is a wonderful reaction, and I think the correct reaction to the Section 107 that's being invoked here, which I'll get to the details on.
Whoa, David. You know, technically, they're not supposed to do this, though. You might be advocating for something, dare I say, illegal. Just keep that in mind. This could be a radical show you didn't know.
In a minute, but here is a clip from CBC News where they're banding together with other unions to defy this order.
An especially pumped up crowd right now with this rally still going on behind me. And the chants of this crowd, hell no, we won't go. And that is referring to that back to work order. They had been told that they were needed back on the job at 2 o'clock this afternoon. That's Eastern time.
David,
they're saying
encourager,
they are not going to do that. They are going to defy this order. This crowd has been joined by other unions, not just CUPE, Unifor. We've got the Machinist Union here. We've seen postal workers unions here. The Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario is here. So this crowd is growing and has blocked off this entire lane here at the departures area at Pearson Airport as they continue to chant and ask the government ask Air Canada rather for what they say is a fair contract.
Here is a very powerful message from the CUPE to the government. This is an important part of the story that isn't getting told by mainstream media. The majority of flight attendants disproportionately happen to be women. And this is also something where the company has, I would say, in bad faith, tried multiple times at this point to state that, oh, well, we have offered the union, you know, very what we consider to be generous pay advances and stuff like that. When you get into the nitty-gritty and the details, a lot of it is usually more focused on the pilots, for example, because that's a very easy argument for people to, like, you know, swallow, especially when you're at home. You're like, oh, yeah, no, I want the pilots to be well paid. I want the pilots to be taken care of. I don't want the pilots to be tired or have to work overtime or anything like that. No, make sure you take care of those pilots, all right? They have important jobs. They keep us alive. I agree that they should be well paid. They should get rest. They should get, you know, adequate vacation time so they can lead healthy and happy lives. But so should everybody else who works for the company. And if there are people who are working for the company, then in this case, they happen to be disproportionately women who also happen to be getting horrifying, you know, salaries below minimum wage once you factor in everything else, then absolutely, we should be fighting on their behalf as well.
CEO made roughly
Section 107 in this case. And I think Air Canada has to learn.
The flight attendants keep passengers safe too, so that's a specious argument. Yeah, absolutely, they keep people safe. Like, again, I don't have any clips ready, but like, have you seen the clips of when there are like weird, unruly passengers and they need to actually be like either zap strapped or like sometimes you just take out a roll of saran wrap and have to wrap them in the saran wrap. But it's, yeah, because you got to keep everyone safe. You are 30,000 feet in the air, right, inside a little teeny metal cylinder. If there's one person who's potentially going to endanger everybody else, right, usually the drunk, usually someone who's had too much to drink, or sometimes just people who are pretending to see things that they don't see. You know, we've all seen that weird woman who thought she had, what was it? It turned out she was faking the entire thing, so that one's not even that funny. That was just like annoying. I don't know if you all seen that viral clip. I wish I had it on hand of there's so much going on in the background. There's like a dude who proposes to his wife. He takes a knee and proposes to her in the flight, but I didn't even notice that he proposed to her because in the background is some white guy getting fucking saran wrapped on his chair, which was too distracting. So I was just like staring at that the entire time, just being like, oh my God. So according to the CUPE, in an almost unthinkable display of conflict of interest, a former Air Canada legal counsel, Maurice Tremblay, will rule on whether to end the job action by striking Air Canada flight attendant at the Canadian Industrial Relations Board. Also seems like a massive conflict of interest, libs. Gotta be honest with you, this whole thing reeks of fucking disgusting ass insider shit.
Will rule on whether to end job action by striking Air Canada flight attendants at the Canada Industrial Relations Board. The Canada Industrial Relations Board is run by somebody who worked for Air Canada in the legal department for 7 years. There's an obvious conflict of interest here, yet this is the person overseeing this who apparently is not recusing herself. Like, it's absolutely insane. Now, as David Coletto writes, this is not going to help Carney. This is from Abacus Data. He's the one that helped to put out that survey I showed you earlier. This is risky for Carney, especially when his weakest perceived leadership trait is understanding what average people are going through. This gives Polyev a chance to rally for workers, which, by the way, Polyev is not serious about that. I've done many videos on that, but different conversation. And primarily female workers in the case of flight attendants. But he's right. Even though Polyev is a complete clown when it comes to labor issues and does not.
By the way, the head of the other unions in Canada held an emergency session, and they are going to now be standing behind the Air Canada flight attendants strike, defying the government's unconstitutional attack on the workers. Which, again, that's why some of this is precedent. Not only is it technically illegal for the the workers to continue striking because they have been ordered back to work and then they've been forced to have mandatory arbitration, but now the other unions are joining on board in solidarity, being like, "Fuck you, government. Fuck you." Then let them fucking bargain. Don't force them to have to accept whatever the fuck the corporation wants to give them. A corporation that, again, was printing cash last year and whose CEOs are making millions and millions of dollars. The head of the company making 458 times what these same workers are asking for. Like, that's grotesque. And so there's solidarity now amongst the unions for, again, illegal, technically, action. So we're talking direct action. The direct kind.
Mean any of it when he tried to position himself as being this pro-labor guy when his entire 20-year career is spent fighting against labor unions. But regardless, a lot of people may not be aware of that or may think he's changed because of the way he's been speaking. And this issue allows him to do that. Now,
similar to how Biden and the railway? Yes, absolutely. So in like a very similar way, if there had been a refusal to listen to Biden's, the forced arbitration when it came to the railway workers, and then there were other unions that suddenly in solidarity joined on board, being like, yes, we officially are going to be, standing on the picket lines with these workers, it becomes a much more difficult story, especially like Mark Carney, I just mean for the optics of the entire thing, because he does care about the optics. I don't think he's going to start arresting the heads of these unions, especially because of just like how horrifying the backlash would be for that. And it would make a situation that is already a disaster for him much, much worse. Especially now that there is solidarity coming. Like the more support that there is, the more people that are striking, the more people that are basically doing direct action, the less you have the ability to simply quash the entire thing, right? We've been protesting on the front lines. Avi Lewis protesting.
I'm here at YVR at the Vancouver airport with these striking QP workers, the flight attendants who are defying a back-to-work order. The QP BC President Karen Redoletta just announced that Air Canada is having to shut down operations. I think the Carney government has severely misjudged this moment. The unfairness of working unpaid is resonating with all Canadians who are upset, who are scandalized by the unfairness of this economy, where people are working 2 jobs and having an impossible time just paying for food and shelter. This is the rage, the outrage, the legitimate outrage that we're seeing in this strike, and it is shared across the country. This is the 99%. This is the feeling of people's power. When we fight back, we win. I'm here at
same thing with Heather McPherson, Leigh Gazan. They've all been at the front lines, on the picket lines, protesting with the workers, so really good for them, as you should be, showing solidarity. I already talked about that incredibly horrifying amount of money.
Air Canada flight attendants are undertaking something that we don't see very often here in Canada, a wildcat strike. And aside from having a very cool name, there are some pretty significant...
Oh, I totally forgot that's what it's called, a wildcat strike, when it's technically an illegal strike. Koryoami, thank you so much for the MX100. And AUPE workers probably go on strike. They've been negotiating for months while the Gaulish government will know in September if the strike happens. Yeah, keep me posted.
Implications for the labor movement here. So I want to take some time to talk about it. But first up, we need a bit of context. So Air Canada flight attendants are negotiating a new contract following the expiration of a 10-year deal in March. And that 10-year deal wasn't exactly popular in the first place. It was approved by a 50.4% margin, not exactly a ringing endorsement. And the long term of that deal has led to a pretty significant long-term erosion of purchasing power. But this dispute goes way beyond just wages. There is also a pretty significant issue of unpaid labor. Wayne Lasowski, a flight attendant and president of the CUPE Air Division, said flight attendants don't start getting paid until the plane is in motion, and their compensation ends when the plane stops at the gate after landing. That means that there's a significant amount of unpaid labor here. CUPE claims around 35 hours a month, which is nearly a week of full-time work. And while this is a fairly common practice across the industry, that doesn't make it acceptable. That doesn't mean that it's a good thing. And I think it's an important reminder that industry standards can and sometimes should be changed. And let's be really clear here. Air Canada's making a lot of money. In 2024, they posted an operating income of $1.26 billion. And they had enough cash to buy back over 35 million shares. But when it comes to the people who actually make the business run, no money for them. Instead, they get lots of unpaid labor. And so negotiations were ongoing until an impasse was declared, and then CUPE issued a 72-hour strike notice. Following that, Air Canada returned back with a 72-hour lockout notice, which brings us to the government stepping in. And public opinion was very strongly with the flight attendants. 59% of people surveyed by Abacus Research sided with flight attendants, compared to just 12% siding with the company. And so the Carney government, with their finger firmly on the pulse, decided to side with the company. They've referred the case to the Canadian Industrial Relations Board, which essentially puts a pause on the strike and sends it for an official review and potentially binding arbitration. And the Canadian federal government has gotten increasingly comfortable in doing this. They did it to rail workers, port workers, Canada Post workers, WestJet mechanics, and others as well. It's not an official suspension of the right to strike, but it winds up having a very similar effect, because it's meant to end the strike and send it to a third party for review. And Jobs Minister Patty Hajdu said, quote, "Now is not the time to take risks with our economy. A work stoppage would cause thousands of Canadians to be stranded abroad and across this country, and this is simply unacceptable." Which serves as a pretty clear reminder that if their work's that valuable, why not just pay them? But clearly that's not an option. They need to use the power of government to force them back to work. But CUPE is defying the back to work order. CUPE National President Mike Hancock stood in front of a crowd and tore up a back to work order. And this has some pretty...
Which was so badass. Hence beginning the Wildcat strike. But, you know, mainstream media outlets are saying things like this, like Air Canada travelers still scrambling to rebook as more flights canceled. I know. That sucks. Again, this is something where it should be framed due to corporate greed, comma, because of corporate greed. Add that. Just add that little thing, because not a lot of people read beyond the headline. We're going to get into that a little bit more with the next story I wanted to talk about, but passengers were still scrambling to rebook their flights home on Sunday as Air Canada canceled more commutes amid an ongoing labor dispute with the union representing more than 10,000 employees. Here's a couple of the people who are having trouble. Passengers, at the end, they ended up paying $2,600 to fly with another airline on a later day after their Air Canada flight from Toronto was canceled due to the strike. They said, we've kind of had it with the idea that we were going out, but then we can't get a hold of anybody and get answers. The couple found seats on a competing flight on Monday, but said it's costing them 3 to 4 times what they initially paid for their original tickets. It's a little frustrating and stressful, but at the same time, I don't blame the flight attendants at all. Hell yeah, Virani. What they're asking for is not unreasonable whatsoever. Hell yeah. See, this is what you love to see, is people still showing solidarity with the workers, even though they're highly inconvenienced and having to pay way more money. But again, you know, there are obviously differences between someone who's like flying somewhere else because they have to attend a funeral, or they have to see a dead relative, or, you know, a sick or dying relative, or they're, you know, being forced for whatever reason to do that. And people who are also just flying for pleasure, which is an incredible privilege, right? Something that, again, you know, only the 10% of the world's, you know, the economic, I don't even want to say the word elite, but like it costs a lot of money to be able to just fly for joy on a regular basis, right? And that just becomes a part of, you know, a highly successful Western nation, where it's like, yeah, you know, these richer nations, what they do is they have a robust middle class, and people with the means eventually get to a point where they're able to afford vacations, and then that becomes the goal, and then that's the thing that you talk to your friends about all the time. It's like, hey, what are you up to? How's work? It sucks. Yeah, work sucks. But hey, guess what? You get the thing. I do get the thing. Pretty soon I get to have that thing, right? The vacation. That's right. That's where you go somewhere else, and then you don't work for a very short amount of time, and then you get to experience joy because you go on the beach and you read and you get alcohol. Yes, alcohol, beach, reading, all that sounds great. Swimming, water, beach. Yes, great. So we got that, and then you get back, and then you're refreshed, and then you're able to keep doing the work thing, and you go back to doing the work. Chrissy says that he's having to pay an extra $2,000 to meet his family in Florida. Instead of flying straight to Vancouver, she's now taking a bus to Seattle before catching another pricier flight. I can't scream, I just have to figure out what to do. So this one, I would say, is not as bad as the other one I read the other day, which was, again, in a mainstream outlet, basically framing the entire thing as like, the strikers have refused a back-to-work order, you know, as they should be. They're trying to defy it.
Pretty significant implications. CUPE could face legal penalties over this, and that seems to be a risk that they're very willing to face. And that's where things are at right now. Workers continue to strike, and the government continues to wag their finger at them. And Air Canada, they're tweeting through it. They're posting numbers of affected flyers and things like, quote, CUPE, Air Canada's flight attendants union, rejects agreement to fly Canadians home. As a result, 25,000 additional passengers are going to...
I'm happy to say they are also getting, in a lot of cases, ratioed to fucking high hell. It's shocking on Twitter. Of all social media, you're seeing an unbelievable amount of support for the workers. I saw someone post, though, you know which social media platform I've seen a lot of people like really being anti-worker, flight attendants? Blue Sky? And I was like, really? And I was like, that's weird. I mean, I haven't really been delving into Blue Sky in terms of like looking at what everyone's saying about the story to get a feel for what the Blue Sky's saying, but that's disappointing. That means that because Blue Sky is oversaturated with libs, right? It's basically lib sky at this point. It's got a very, very strong, resistance, blue wave, Cheeto man, orange man bad, must be stopped kind of energy to it. And if they're effectively trying to side with the Liberal Party of Canada here, because those are, their official position is get back to work, I say. That's sad. That's sad that, you start actually resisting resistance libs. This is something you should resist.
Be stranded abroad. Worth noting, they don't seem to mention that they could just change their offer, just that the workers should accept it. Funny how they don't want to focus on that very important detail. And so now we have what's called a wildcat strike, which, beyond being a cool name, is a pretty unusual occurrence. It essentially means that it's a strike outside of legal frameworks for striking. And to be honest, it's not that surprising. The Liberal government has made it harder and harder to strike and harder to stand up against employers. Because every time there's a large strike, it seems like the Canadian federal government is eager to force them back to work. But not through back to work legislation. That was what was used in the past. These days, they're referring it to the Industrial Relations Board. And there's a pretty important difference here, because back to work legislation needs to be voted on by Parliament. They need to debate it. And in the case of a minority parliament like we have right now, they need to get support from other parties. But that's not what the government is doing. They're just referring it to the Industrial Relations Board and skipping that parliamentary democratic process entirely. Which is why now you're hearing members of basically every party other than the Liberals speaking out against this, and even some Liberals. And I think it's really important to address the precedent that this sets, because it's happened again and again. If an employer doesn't negotiate a fair deal with their workers, they seem to just be able to rely on the federal government to force those workers back to work, and to send it to binding arbitration or the Industrial Relations Board. So if you're an employer and you know that the government's going to force your workers back, why would you negotiate in good faith? Why would you negotiate a fair deal? It creates an enormous power imbalance, but it also creates an expectation that the government's going to step in if your organization is big enough and important enough to the Canadian economy. And so while this may not necessarily be an official suspension of the right to strike, it has a very similar impact. It puts workers in a trap where it takes away options so that they just sort of have to hope the government decides they deserve a fair deal. And that brings us to the wildcat strike. Because those legal frameworks were established to maintain labor peace, to give stability, to give order, all that stuff. Workers gave up some of their freedoms and flexibilities in order to have some of that stability and predictability. Like how generally workers will only strike during a bargaining period, not just whenever the mood takes them. But this has led to a long-term erosion of labor rights, and we're seeing the culmination of that. Basically, now you can only strike when the government thinks it's okay that you strike. And once you create that sort of situation, workers start to push back, and you've already been seeing labor. That. We've seen what happened in recent years when CUPE workers in Ontario were mandated back to work by the Ford government and refused. And in that case, the wildcat action was extraordinarily successful, as the Ford government withdrew the legislation that was forcing workers back. So if you ask me, there's a pretty straightforward path here. If the government actually wants to send Air Canada workers back to work, they should have to pass back to work legislation through Parliament, rather than just passing it off to the Industrial Relations Board and declining any further comment. They should have to debate it, they should have to stand by it in Parliament. In fact, they should make it a confidence motion. If they actually believe this is what the public wants, they should be willing to stake their status as government on it. And if they're not willing to do that, what does that tell you? And to be very clear here, I do not support back-to-work legislation. I support workers' rights, and the best deals are made at the bargaining table. My point here is that the Canadian government isn't using back-to-work legislation because they know that it would fail. So they're just working around it instead. And you're going to see a lot of stories in the next little while about canceled flights, about people who are stranded and can't get home and who have been negatively impacted by the lockout. And to be clear, those folks have my sympathies. They didn't ask for this, but Air Canada could end this very easily by offering a fair deal and returning to the table with a better offer.
That's like such an important point, because this happens during every kind of strike, whether it be like, garbage workers strike, where all of a sudden the garbage piles up and everyone's like, oh my God, it smells like garbage. There's rats everywhere. Like, what do we do? And then it's like, yeah, in this case, we should be applying pressure. We should be using the real sympathy of like, yeah, it sucks to be stuck at an airport. It sucks to not be able to go home. And it sucks to have your flights canceled. All of that is terrible. So fuck Air Canada, right? That's like all there is to it. Not the strikers, not the workers, who are again demanding that they make above minimum wage. Fuck the corporation that is refusing to pay them adequately. Hey, maybe
they chose
good
not
to see you.
Instead, they went with a lockout,
Everyone check out
likely in
my
hopes
channel.
that the government would step in and send things to the Industrial Relations Board, which they did. And I think it's important to recognize this as an opportunity for solidarity, an opportunity to stand by workers who are fighting for their rights and fighting for a fair deal. It's okay to be frustrated, but I think it's important to direct that frustration in the right direction. It isn't just about flights, and it isn't just about a single negotiation. It's about labor rights. It's about who gets to withhold their labor and what mechanisms the government is using to stop it. Because if they can't negotiate and they can't withhold their labor, how are Air Canada workers meant to get a fair deal? But more than that, if the right to strike in Canada is only with government permission and the government doesn't give its permission, then what? This is about workers getting a fair deal, and if employers know that the government's going to step in and break strikes whenever they're inconvenient for the government or the economy, then what reason is there for employers to negotiate in good faith?
If you were to look at the headlines that a lot of the right, including Americans, I've seen a lot of American pundits talking about the story as an example of how Canada has fallen. Can you believe this? That there is a nurse in Canada who got fined $100,000 for what? Believing in biological reality? That men are men and women are women? She was fined $100,000 for what? How dare she? And the mainstream media in Canada as well is kind of framing it that way, because people sometimes just don't read beyond the headlines. So if you see a headline like this, all of a sudden it's kind of scary, right? BC nurse suspended by college, fined $94,000 for comments about trans people. Amy Ham says she plans to appeal the case in BC Supreme Court, but's maintained that she is not transphobic. So this is the CBC, as in my tax dollars for going towards this headline. So, what? BC nurse Amy Ham gets suspension, fines for comments about trans people. My God, what about you, City News? BC nurse gets suspension, fines for comments about trans people. Oh my God, it's true. It's all over the place. Except it's a lie in the way that it's framed. She wasn't fined by the college. She wasn't fined for her comments on trans people. She was given a suspension for her transphobia. Not only was it very, very blatant, both in all of her social media, her advocacy out loud, as well as taking out billboards. Yes, paying for transphobic billboards, shit like that, right? A lot of people are going to be like, oh, it just said I love J.K. Rowling. Shit like that. She could have taken the suspension. She could have just taken a suspension, and that would have been the end of the story. She takes a 1-month suspension, and story's over. She decided to battle it. She decided to dispute it. And when you do that, this is just the way this works, if you lose, which she did, because the evidence was overwhelming that she was, yes, making a lot of transphobic comments, she then had to pay the legal fees. That's so different. But again, you wouldn't know that. When you read all these headlines, when you see all these, like, there's no wonder to me that pundits in the US, especially right-wing pundits who hate trans people, were using this as a massive story. They were posting this all over the fucking place. You can name your fucking favorite pundit, scroll through the timeline. You'll probably find them posting something about, apparently in communist Canada, it's okay to get fined $100,000 because you tell the truth about biological reality. If you tell the truth about biological females, all of a sudden you get fined $100,000 in Canada. No. She could have just done nothing, taken the suspension, and then guess what? Gone back to work, and that would have been the end of the story. Instead, like a lot of these, right-wing, I now need to turn this into a cause, I now need to do the whole podcast circuit, I now have to be a Jordan Peterson and talk about how apparently there's a totalitarian government silencing my speech and all this kind of stuff. When you tell people, well, yeah, she got fined $100,000. No. She got a suspension, she wanted to arbitrate it and battle it, she lost that battle, and then she had to pay the legal fees, which, yes, when the College of Nurses and the Association of Nurses decided to be able to go to arbitration, they of course want to defend their decision, so they have to hire lawyers. Lawyers are very, very expensive. They then have to provide evidence. They then have to, again, present that evidence towards the college and then to be like, hey, by the way, here are all our justifications for suspending her. We believe that within her position, it is obviously not only dangerous, but, something worth suspending someone over if they are, again, potentially going to put their clients in harm's way by spreading very horrifying and transphobic stuff. Some of her patients at some point or another could be trans. It's just something that we're going to have to take a stance on. And then she's like, well, I'm going to battle it. And then I lost. And then you get a story like this. And then that's enough again for, say, politicians to start making little TikTok videos about it.
Fined almost $100,000. License suspended. Amy Ham is being punished, not for harming a patient, not for misconduct, but for saying women are female and that women deserve their own spaces. The College of Nurses and Midwives is spending years and tens of thousands of dollars persecuting a nurse.
They wouldn't have spent any money persecuting, aka having to go to arbitration over this, if she hadn't disputed it. That was her decision. She's an adult. She's a grown-up. She made a grown-up decision. She was like, I'm first going to be doing all my transphobia, putting that out there, just so we can have ourselves a time. And then she received a discipline from, again, the college for that. And then she was like, you know what? I'm going to battle that. Because no, I say, fine. But then, again, that's going to cost lawyers a bunch of money. And so they eventually had to get that lawyer fees. And then she lost, because it turns out she was being transphobic on Maine. And that should have been the end of the story. But here we are.
For her own personal beliefs. While hospitals are overwhelmed, ERs are understaffed, and patients wait months and sometimes years for surgery, this is where their focus is. This isn't about safety. This is about silencing anyone who won't bow to their ideology. The system is failing, and they're hunting truth tellers. Hunting.
She's being hunted. That's again, just none of this is true. And honestly, I expect this from the white supremacist political party 1BC. They are a white supremacist political party. No surprise that fascists are going to fash. Yeah, that's part and parcel. But shame on you, mainstream media, for, again, making these headlines, because all they have to do is take a screenshot. They have the headline there, they put it up there, and they're like, BC nurse fined $100,000 for her beliefs on trans people, for talking about biological realities. Look at that. And this is wonderful. Just what a gift to all the right-wingers in America who fucking now are pointing towards the story and being like, we told you, this is where gender ideology leads. This is the end result. They want you to have groupthink, and they need you to bow to the orthodoxy, and you are going to be fined, and dare I say imprisoned, hunted. You will be hunted if you don't obey. If you don't obey their weird ideas like boys can be girls and girls can be boys. Look what happens. Well, CBC, this kind of, you have a little bit of blame to serve here. You could have made the headline very, very clear, right? BC nurse fined lawyer's fees after losing case over transphobic comments. Here are the transphobic comments, so everyone has some context. Not she was fined for her views on trans people. As if, like, the college has the ability to do that. Do you think the College Association of Nurses just walks around being like, you have defied us, fine!
Don't let this happen to you. Go to serfscoffee.com to order the only end-to-end owned indigenous coffee company that delivers blood-free, conflict-free, and cruelty-free beans right to your door. 0% of people who drink serfscoffee.com have exploded spontaneously. By ordering right now, you get 10% off plus free shipping, and it's the best way to enjoy delicious coffee while not exploding. That's serfscoffee.com, serfscoffee.com.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. This video wouldn't be at all possible without the financial support of all the people whose names you see on the screen right now. And if you want to unlock secret bonus episodes, content that we can't post anywhere else, or get the videos early before anyone else gets to see them, please go on to patreon.com/theserfs. For as little as $1, you can help support this channel and help make more videos like this possible. Our executive producers are Anna Loves Riley, Adrian McCarthy, Bobby Lasers, Cheryl Alvarez, Comrade Junkie, Doug Caddy, Everything Important, Garrett Sandoval, Hagbard Celine, Jimmy Sombrero, Multimondi, Omni, Political Papi, Preston Kroll, Quiet 185, Richard Boehm, Riley and Anna, Roller Dragon, Cernicus, Stellar Gwyn, Sebastian Demel, Tigwig, Trav, and Words Greenwood. And also, it wouldn't be possible without all the names you see on the screen right now. Again, if you want to help produce this content, it's only made possible through the funding of our patrons.